And welcome to today's webinar, our SAP Change Control webinar on how to enable end-to-end change management in SAP systems. So basically, this is what we're going to be doing today. So I'll run through a couple of brief introductions, then get straight into the webinar. We'll talk initially about SAP application lifecycle management software silos. We'll talk about how we integrate those silos and different solutions. We're then going to show you, or my colleague Chris Drake will anyway, an example of an integrated SAP DevOps solution specifically around the area of SAP testing software. And then we'll just take a wrap and take a few questions and finish up today. So around about 40 minutes, Chris and I estimate. Might be a little over, might be a little under. So if you just imagine that that's the amount of time you'll need today, then you'll be fine. So who we are? So my name is Rick Porter. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Rev-Trac here at Revelation Software Concepts. And joining me today is Chris Drake, and he's our Director of Product and Services for Rev-Trac here at Revelation Software Concepts as well. So who is Revelation Software Concepts? For those of you who don't know, and I see there's a number of customers on the call today, so welcome and thank you for joining. We've been automating SAP change management with our software Rev-Trac since 1997. Our goal really is to enable SAP IT teams to achieve a range of different outcomes at their end so that they can serve their businesses well, so they can react to market and regulatory changes very quickly. But what are some of the things that the SAP IT teams need to do? Well, they need to be outcome focused. These are the kinds of outcomes that SAP IT teams need to deliver. They really need to be able to release more frequent releases. They need to increase the volume and the delivery rates that they can move out for the business, and they need to improve their change quality. And the reason for this is so that their business customers can react more quickly to market conditions, and they can retain or maintain competitive advantage. The problem with this is it's not new. This is across the board, not just for SAP IT teams, but for almost all IT teams working in enterprise organizations today. Unfortunately, existing SAP IT tools and processes limit success. They limit the ability for IT teams to deliver the kind of outcomes that they're charged with. And mainly because the tools and processes really haven't changed much in 30 years. Now, I haven't been involved in SAP IT for 30 years, but I have for getting on close to 20 now. And most customers we bump into that run SAP are still using the same things they used when SAP was first implemented. So these tools and these processes, they are siloed. They're essentially quite manual, which means they're speed limiting and they're error prone. And today, as things are speeding up, things like DevOps and Agile and release management and rapid changes in the market come into place, this really limits what an SAP IT team can do and how they can react. So automation really is the way of the future. Digitizing the SAP IT change process is important. This eliminates the manual effort that's required. It can integrate a whole range of different tool sets. It can enforce processes, and importantly, it removes those speed limits that actually prevent SAP IT teams from delivering the kind of outcomes that they are expected to deliver. So this is the existing state, the status quo. So we have a change coming into the IT team at the left-hand side here, and then it gets managed through the system through a range of paperwork, spreadsheets, Word documents, emails, and the transports are migrated using standard SAP TMS. And that's the process that's been managed for a very long time and hasn't really changed at all. Problem is, this is limiting. It is manual, it's error prone, and it is speed limiting. So the next step is to begin looking at automation, and we find that most IT teams sort of begin with looking at automating their ITIL service desk area. Now, this could be through SAP Service Desk in Solution Manager, although that's probably the least popular thing that we do see, or through something like ServiceNow, which is probably the most prolific, or Sharewell, or Remedy Force, or something similar in that particular case. Now, this is a good beginning, but it too has its limitations because there's no integration between the service desk, between SAP TMS or the spreadsheet, or whatever else is being used as well. So what's happening inside your SAP systems could be very different to what your service desk is telling you has happened. And things can actually happen inside the SAP system without the service desk even knowing about it. So this is a little limiting and certainly not ideal, but we begin to see this as being a method of at least tracking changes and working them through the best way that one can then. So the next steps really then is to begin to automate other areas and bring in other tool sets to manage change in and around the business request. So we begin to see unit and regression testing tools are becoming more popular now. And we often ask a poll question during these is what tools are you looking at acquiring within the next 12 months? And automated testing is actually right up there, which is probably why you're on this webinar today, truth be told as well. There are other things available like automated code review systems that can be implemented and run. And then of course, you've got impact assessment tools as well. And there's a whole range of these. Inside Solution Manager, you've got ATC and so on in there that can also be used too. So there's a whole range of methods and systems that SAP IT teams can use to be able to pull all these kind of things together. And then of course, we can then implement a change management automation solution as well. But I think in looking at this diagram, you can see the issue straight away. The problem here is we've actually got siloed operations. We've got one team using the change management automation system, probably another team using the ITIL service desk that actually feeds possibly the change management solution, picking up information from the service desk, entering it into the change management solution and managing it that way. Then perhaps someone says, well, I need to do some impact assessment, or now we need to do the unit and regression testing. These are all operating in silos. There's no guarantee that any of them are going to be used. And it actually is the beginning of the process. It's certainly not the end of the process, that's for sure. What we're really looking to achieve is more of an end-to-end integrated process. So by utilizing Rev-Trac, which is the SAP Change Control Automation platform provided by Revelation Software Concepts, we now have the ability to begin to integrate these systems and tools together. So usually what we're doing first for our customers is we're integrating their ITIL service desk. And so this will automatically create a Rev-Trac request once a service ticket has been raised, or if for any reason the IT team raises a Rev-Trac ticket themselves, it will automatically create a service desk ticket as well. Then at particular terms along the progression of that change, that service desk will be updated. Signatures can be transferred between Rev-Trac and the service desk, or the service desk and Rev-Trac. So now we have a fully integrated solution. Because Rev-Trac manages and chaperones every single change across the environment, and you cannot make a change without attaching it to a Rev-Trac request, we now have the opportunity for the service desk to accurately represent exactly what's going on inside the SAP system. So this is often the first step of integration that we see. Then we can find that we can actually fully integrate code review, whether this is an external tool such as an Synapsis solution, or the solution from Solution Manager. It can be there. So at a particular step in the process, we find that Rev-Trac will automatically kick off this code review. The results come back in, and then the IT team can make a decision, and so on. Then perhaps one might do some impact assessment. I've got a change here. How's that going to impact the rest of the environment? Do I need to run particular tests and so on as well? And then, of course, integrating unit and regression testing. Now, we haven't today seen a single customer integrate all of these, but we certainly have customers that have integrated one or the other of these. So we've got customers with fully integrated unit and regression testing. We've got customers who have integrated code review, others impact assessment, and many who have impacted or implemented the integration of the ITIL service desk. The value of this, of course, is now we've got an end-to-end integration. We've got a fully automated process from beginning to end. We have the ability to ensure that all of these things are occurring, that as a change is created and beginning to be managed, that we can be certain that what the IT team has determined necessary for that change to go through, it will. And we have full transparency right the way across through all these integrations as well. What we want to do today is to begin to show you that this is not just a theoretical view of life, but it can actually be something that can be fully implemented and done. So we're going to show you today some integrations around particularly the tools sets produced by Tricentis Tosca, and show you how they can be integrated with Rev-Trac to begin to create that end-to-end view of life that we've seen before. So where we'll show that impact assessment is automatically kicked off, and that unit and regression testing can also be automatically kicked off as well. Now, Chris will explain shortly exactly what we're going to be showing, but we can show you that this end-to-end integration solution that we are aiming to provide for you is actually possible today, and it's not just simply a theoretical thing. So this is the area that we're going to be looking at today. And so rather than talk about it, let me pass across to Chris Drake. Chris is, as I mentioned, our Director of Product and Services. Chris is responsible for the direction of our product, and has been the guy behind a lot of our drive to begin to change the way that we do things and look at things, and integrate with other tools as well. And so Chris has been with the company for over 10 years, certainly very experienced. He has been in front of literally hundreds of SAP IT teams over the years, and is certainly well versed to take us through this today. So thanks, Chris, welcome, and over to you.
Good day. Thank you very much for the introduction, Rick, and thank you everybody for your time. So as Rick has explained, we are going to be showing a couple of demonstrations. They are pre-recorded just so that we can make sure that you get the best experience, but I'll be walking through live what's going on in these recordings. We've broken it up into two sections just so that we can make it clear as to what's occurring, because when you start getting a highly integrated environment, obviously with lots of moving parts, it becomes harder to see what's going on. So initially we're going to show just straight integrations with firstly Live Compare, and then with Tosca. Live Compare, of course, being the impact assessment and impact analysis tool, and Tosca being the test automation tool set. So the first demonstration, it's very basic, and I'm trying to illustrate it in this diagram right here. What's happening from the dev system before the transports are released, we're getting an understanding of the impact analysis. Okay, so I'll launch that video and walk you through what's happening here. All right, so what we're looking at is a Rev-Trac request. At the very top, we can see we've got a status bar here. This is the approval workflow that's required to progress these changes through to the production instance. You can see on the right-hand side some comments. This is where people can add some information to this request. The workflow shows historically what has occurred on this change. You can see it was put in progress because transports were added. Our technical tab also shows us what is being impacted. So this is the contents of the objects inside of the various transports attached to that Rev-Trac request. You can also see we can drill into some of these objects. That's some of the workbench objects that we selected. And for those who aren't familiar with this new user interface, we've also got our attachments and references as tabs on the side of the screen. What I'm about to do now is just create a new object and attach it to this Rev-Trac request. So sort of standard developer activity. Sometimes functional analysts will be making these types of changes to add objects to transports. And in this case, it will result in a brand new transport being created as well. So for those who aren't familiar, what we're also seeing is Rev-Trac enforcement here. Enforcement is the concept of making sure that the transports that are being made in the SAP system are going onto Rev-Trac requests. So we know what the use of this transport is and the purpose that it serves to the organization or the project that it's busy running in. So enforcement is an interesting word because while we refer to enforcement here as the transport enforcement, the beauty of Rev-Trac integrating things is that we're actually enforcing behavior, workflows, and the use of other tool sets during the workflow process. So I've just gone back to my Rev-Trac request. We can see that additional transport is now part of the subset of change, and that object has been added to this list. By clicking on the next approval step, we're actually launching our integration now with Live Compare, and that's why we've called this integration step the Live Compare impact assessment step. But we can see here we're actually checking from the source system of dev against our production system. Okay, so that's where the impact analysis is being performed, and we're making sure that we have an understanding of what this change impacts across the production instance. So I'll choose to continue. This is just letting us know one of these transports is on another Rev-Trac request, which is sometimes an option, a viable way of using Rev-Trac. We can also see here there's a value that's been automatically generated on our references tab. And earlier on in this demonstration, we noticed that the references tab was blank. And this just lets us know that there is some impact analysis in progress. So I'll just reload this. And what we can see now is the impact analysis is complete. Okay, so now we're coming across to Live Compare. It's an area I'm less familiar with. These are the Live Compare reports. I will also add this is the older version of Live Compare, so it doesn't look as nice. The newer version actually has quite an interesting impact analysis projection that tries to break up the areas impacted within the system as well and show the risk associated by different objects in different areas that are impacted. It's a pretty cool infographic and it's quite interactive. But here we can see I'm just navigating through some of the information. This will certainly mean a lot to certain users and less to other people attending today. But essentially, it should give the developers an idea as to what's happening before they progress this change and determine whether it's a good idea to even continue progressing the change. This office development complete, and we can see that the developers were forced to be engaging with Live Compare before they were able to mark the change as development complete. So that's an interesting one. Again, the concept of enforcing a transport, but then also enforcing the users to be utilizing the Live Compare tool set. And that's a common thing when it comes to integrating. So in that part of the demonstration, I'm just summarizing what we saw there. We saw the auto collation of changes. Yeah, that's the concept of putting multiple transports and all of the objects on a single Rev-Trac request, which then makes that change bound to a workflow process. We saw the auto impact assessment of these changes. And this last dot point's actually inaccurate. We didn't see the approval of changes to QA or the auto migration, but what we saw is the completion of the change and the developer signing off to say that this is a complete request ready for subscription. Good news, in the next part of the demonstration, we will see the triggering of transport migration. Part two of the demonstrations that we're going to show you. This is where we have a functional test occurring inside of the QA system. And I'll just briefly walk you through diagram, what we will showcase, it'll move across to the QA system. It's going to automatically, on arrival in QA, invoke Tosca to perform some tests. Initially, we're actually going to see a failure, okay? And the failure will revert the change back to the development team, and the developers will have the opportunity to then remedy the. Once the issue has been remedied, once again, they'll trigger them, and that the remedy obviously comes through via a transport. A transport being added to the same Rev-Trac request, of course, which will remedy the defect. Once that transport has been into the QA system, therefore resolving the issues that were discovered in QA, we should see a successful test, and that will allow for us to progress the change to the production instance. But of course, what we'll see is that Tosca will automatically mark that change as testing successful, and will then allow for the change to instance automatic. And that's why we're seeing that green line on the right-hand side there. So I'll shoot across to, again, a pre-recorded video, and I'll walk you through these steps. So this time we're starting off in the Rev-Trac dashboard screen. And I do want to emphasize, we've made a big effort to improve the home screen of Rev-Trac here with our dashboards. The big reason why we've gone with dashboards, just as I'm completing this, is we found that when we were searching and trying to improve our SEOs online, search engine optimization, we found that the #1 Googled thing around change management was analytics. So it's certainly important to our customer base and to those people who are looking for SAP change. So what I've done, I've just created a new Rev-Trac request here. We can see it's a tax adjustment for the GST in 2018. So this video is probably a little bit on the older side. We have been doing this integration for quite a while now. What I'm going to do now, cutting over to the SAP system, I'm just modifying a domain here, and you can see the value I'm going to put in here is a num-c value. And essentially, we've just set Tosca to say that if it finds a num-c value here, it's going to trigger a failure. But if it finds a char value there, it will pass. Okay. So as I make this modification, we can see that will once again go on the Rev-Trac request. And when we just load this up here, so you can see the transport number, no logs at this point because, of course, this transport is unreleased at this time. So refreshing, we'll look at the technical tab, and we'll be able to see that the transport is now on this request, and we've got a single domain there that said ZCHAR5 value. Okay. At this point, we should be able to trigger the migration to the QA system. And we can see when I release this transport, it will be sent to QAS client 001, all transports from the dev system. Now, of course, if we have transports from that other environment, as highlighted at the top, CNS, it would go to its respective target system. We've got a couple of automatic safety checks that are occurring as well. We've got pods and KISS. Pods will show us dependencies, and KISS will show us some of the code impact scoring, which will show you the criticality of some of the code being modified in the case of workbench objects. And again, approving the migration step, we can just have a look at the logs. We can see this transport's being automatically released in the background, and then will automatically be migrated to the QA instance. See those logs occurring in the background automatically there. So once that is complete, Rev-Trac will automatically sign the post-migration status, and that's based on successful return codes for the transport imports. On automatic signing of the post-migration status, this is when Rev-Trac starts to engage Tosca in the background. Okay, So what I'm doing here, I'm coming over to another server. This is where we have the Tosca CI set up, and I'm actually not engaging the screen at the moment. This is Tosca's automation in the background. You can see the scripting that's occurring here in this command terminal, and that's essentially Rev-Trac engaging with Tosca, performing its various automation steps and performing those tests in the background. On the Rev-Trac request, what we will see is a bit of detail just confirming that something's happening here. So you can see in the references, we have a description, the test has been submitted, and we can see the XML file that's in place. That's busy triggering the Tosca test automatically. Now, obviously this is a real-time video that I created here. Tosca does take a few moments to generate the tests and to come back with a return code. And what we're seeing now is it's actually come back with its return code. The Rev-Trac request has been moved back to in progress, okay, which suggests a failure. We can see in the attachments now, this is where Tosca returns the results. At the moment, it's still in XML format, and we can see that the description of this test result is that it has failed. All right. I will just keep refreshing a few times, because what happens is Rev-Trac will actually convert this now to HTML so that it's a readable format, and we can see the results here. We can see that there was one failure, and we can see red line, which basically indicate that this was a negative test result. There's something that needs to be remedied in this environment. So what I'm going to do now, in my dev system, I'll change that value back to a char value, the way it's meant to be, which will trigger a successful test. And again, add the remedy transport to this Rev-Trac request. And I'll just enter the new transport value there. You can see two transports. The one is released and it's in the QA system, and the new remedy transport is still unreleased and is not yet in any target systems. So when this developer is ready to send it to the subsequent system and they believe they fixed whatever defect was discovered in QA, they can then once again approve the migration status. Okay, we can see this transport, it's already been released, it's busy being migrated to the QA system. We can see those import steps occurring. And once again, we'll see that Tosca is being engaged as this is successfully migrated into the QA system. We can see that the second test is being kicked off. Okay, the test is submitted. The first one is still marked as failed. And again, moving over to our server where Tosca resides, we'll start seeing some of those automation steps. I'll just speed this part up a little bit. So again, that's the Tosca automation, just logging in. It does this check twice. And we can move back to our Rev-Trac request now. This time, when I hit the refresh step, you'll notice that status is moved automatically to test and complete. And in the approvals, you can also see. And this was done by a user called Auto Test. Okay, it was not by Chris Drake, who's done all of the other approvals in this case. So again, on the references tab, we can see the testing's passed against that test result. And on the attachments, in a few moments, we'll get our HTML conversion, and we'll be able to see the test results. And now this time we've got all green lights. It has successfully passed all of the testing. And this is now ready for migration to production. Now, of course, you can have additional user steps, whether it's user acceptance or whether this change goes into something like a release before it's approved for migration to production. But essentially, what we saw there, again, auto correlation of the changes, auto release and migration of transports across our landscape, auto unit test of changes, and to be fair, it was more a functional test, but an auto test of the changes in the QA system. We've got auto reversion of the change requiring remediation. So that was when we saw the failure, and it went back to the developer so that he was notified. And of course, what we've got in the background, which we didn't really emphasize in that video, is that there's workflow emails driving the behavior of the users. So as the developer is notified your test has failed, of course, a workflow email is generated that has a URL link to the Rev-Trac request. They'll be able to see the results of the test failure. So it's all in one easy cockpit for understanding what their next task needs to be. Then we saw the auto test completion, which was when the test did pass, and then we were ready and in a position to perform the migration to the production instance. So hopefully that made a bit of sense. Those videos are available on the website as well, so that you can take your time to look at them. They have, audio, which is probably a little better timed on the day of recording. So what we also wanted to discuss a little bit was the theoretical future, because as Rick mentioned earlier on, we don't have customers doing all of it just yet. Now, the beautiful thing is we are working closely with Tricentis. They're a powerhouse in the area of test automation, and we are looking to get something together where we can have all three of these products integrating really well. So what we see the future being is one where you could almost have from the development system a single button being clicked, and then the next thing is that this change is ready for production. I want to introduce a third concept to the mix here. So we've obviously seen live compares impact assessment. We've seen Tosca's test automation. But here's the way we see it working really, really well with Rev-Trac. And to get it working as best as possible, we need to introduce a third concept into the mix, which is release management. So release management is a concept of having the ability to bundle changes which are ready for production or ready for, in this case, even pre-production, into what we consider a release. Okay, so in the same way as you have multiple transports in a single Rev-Trac request, you would then have multiple Rev-Trac requests in a single release, and the release then deploys as a group of changes. Now, that release can consist of multiple applications. So if you've got a change that impacts BW, ERP, and let's say something like APO and even Portal, you can have all the transports from all of those four systems on one Rev-Trac request. Rev-Trac knows where it's sending the transports, and that way you're approving changes and you're performing your tests on all of the transports as a functional unit of work, rather than having to deal with multiple transports. We're really passionate about getting people away from managing individual transports. Transports is something that developers should deal with as a byproduct of making change, but not something people should be managing and micromanaging as they move towards their production environments. So we're passionate about that. But again, what we're seeing here is changes having their own life cycle as they move from dev to QA. We consider this the build process, or the dev process if you want. And then really what we'd like to see customers starting to adopt is this concept of wrapping them into a single release. And this is what we call the deployment and also the ops process. So if you can think, you've got your dev and your ops, the dev being the build, the ops being the deployment, and the understanding of what's coming and being adopted into your pre-production and your production instances. So that's the third concept we want to introduce. There are a few videos available on the website. It's a very good part of our new tool set. It works amazingly well in the web user interface. So we do encourage our users to start, our customer base to start looking at that, and of course our prospects to give this a good look. But what we do here and we encourage is that the regression testing is triggered via Tosca from the release level. Okay, we didn't see that today. We saw an individual change have some functional tests occurring just specific to the change. But in this case, the entire regression stack or series of tests can and should be kicked off at the release level as you introduce these changes into a pre-production environment or similar. Of course, we do have the ability to then have defects. Defects, once you start using release management, there's a lot of flexibility in how you do this. You could piggyback the original change if you found a defect on change one, or you can have an additional change request that manages all the defects that then joins, and it goes through its own build process through dev and QA. And once we find that all the defects have been remedied in QA, we then join the release, and it couples up with the release for eventual deployment to production. And of course, you can kick off those regressions again once the defect joins all of the changes that were already in the pre-production environment to make sure that they're ready for production deployment. So that's the concept of release management. When you start including this, and we're going to build up to this a little bit, into a tightly coupled and well integrated environment, the next concept to bring in is where the impact analysis and the Tosca functional testing can be enhanced even more. So once these are tightly coupled and you have an understanding of all the impact assessments, the next step is to make sure that your testing is actually got the coverage that it needs. So there's no good having all these great testing tools and having only 40% of the test coverage that you need. So this is where Tricentis's Live Compare product really showcases the holes and the gaps in your test coverage. So because you've got that impact assessment, it can then point itself at Tosca, have a look, and determine whether the test coverage is to a high enough standard. And if you don't have a good enough test coverage, we can actually set thresholds then in Rev-Trac to say, sorry, you don't have the test coverage you need to send this change to the QA environment, and we can hold it up at the point of the development approval to the QA environment to say you're not even entitled or welcome to send it to QA until the test team have managed to fill it with the test coverage that it needs. Now that's the concept of shifting as far left as possible, finding these details before we even leave the system. Now, in an ideal world, there's a few options. You could get your test team to come in, provide the test coverage as quickly as possible so that you can deploy to the QA system. Perhaps it's understanding that this is actually too risky a change at this point to even start moving across the landscape because there's just no way to confidently test it using automation. And then the third option, which is very rarely the case, is to actually review the way you've performed the development to see if you're maybe creating unnecessary objects that can't be tested easily, or maybe there's a way we can utilize existing objects to ensure that there is a good amount of test coverage as we progress along the landscape. So once we have these three working together, we can impact the behavior of the users very early on in the test automation, and also once we understand that impact. So this is how we hope customers and organizations will start seeing the complete picture. And that is really where we've got that loop that we just saw in the previous slide, combined with the concept that was showed in the slide before. So again, the concept is introducing release management and regression testing at a release level, along with the functional testing occurring in the build process, the dev and QA systems. And this is the complete picture, okay, which is where we have individual changes progressing across the landscape. They're unable to progress to the QA system unless there's a suitable amount of test coverage inside of Tosca. They're unable to progress until they've utilized the Live Compare impact analysis. We then also have the concept of bundling these changes together as they are deemed ready and tested at a functional level into a release, sending them across to the pre-production environment as a group, and then commencing regression testing to ensure that, of course, as an entire group of changes, introducing what could be in theory 50 to 100 changes on a weekly or monthly basis into a pre-production environment, we haven't caused any negative impacts to our regression testing. So that's how we see this. We're looking for customers to help us. We've got a few that are in the early stages of helping us. We've worked closely with the Tricentis team to be able to make this capable. We have next week our Rev-Trac 8.2 release coming out, and it will include the necessary updates to make sure that we have the tight integration with Live Compare and Tosca to be able to perform this kind of functionality. So we're quite excited about this. Again, just harping on something I said a little bit earlier, the concept of enforcement. So we are as the orchestration layer in this DevOps deployment chain, as we like to call it, we're enforcing the use and the practices of this development and the delivery team into the production environment. And this is really important because when we spoke to some of our customers about different products and third-party tools that they were using, we often heard, yes, we purchased that and we used it for 1 or 2 projects, and then people just stopped using it. And this is really something we're quite passionate about, is the concept of enforcing this into your process means that it's there, it's a loud elephant in the room, if you want to call it that. So if you're not looking after these tools and keeping them up and running, you're not getting the ROI out of it. If your developers and your testers aren't using these tools on a day-to-day basis for every single change as it progresses across the landscape, you're not getting the ROI. So by plugging them into a DevOps automation layer and allowing for Rev-Trac to orchestrate and automate the use of these other tools, you're also enforcing the use, and you're seeing a much higher return on investment for these tool sets. You don't have people bypassing the process. You don't have people forgetting to use them. They're being forced to use them because they're simply not able to move their changes to subsequent systems until they've met the organization's policy around what that workflow process should look like. So I'm going to hand back to Rick now, and I hope that was informative. We are, of course, happy to take on some questions. So Rick, on to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris. That was very informative. I learned a little bit more then as well, so thank you very much. By the way, this is a repeat of a presentation Chris and I gave at the Tricentis Accelerate conference in Vienna, late last year. So we've got a little bit of time. So if you would like to ask a question, pop it into the question box. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier. So far, there's no one's popped a question in there. So what I'll do is I'll just move through to wrapping up to give you time to pop a question or 2 in there. And if there's one by the time I'm finished, we will address it. If not, we'll close up for the day. Of course, you can send any question you might think of after the event by replying to the email that you'll be getting in your inbox shortly. So just in wrapping up today then, we learned that ALM solutions within SAP are beginning to be implemented, but they are still very much siloed. They're running one at a time, often with different teams at different steps of the process, no communication between them, and no enforcement of them either. So no guarantee that they're actually being used without a significant amount of manual and human policing. But what we've seen today is that we can go from systems that are operated in silos, that are operated manually, relying on human decisions where things can be missed and processes can be worked around, to an end-to-end automation process where manual steps and triggers are removed, decisions are automated, where nothing gets missed and processes are enforced. The end result of this is it will enable SAP IT teams to better meet the requirements placed on them by business, which is to deliver higher volumes of change much more quickly than they can today, but without reducing any quality at all. So something that everybody we speak to is looking for and trying to achieve. So I trust that that's been of value to you today and works that through as well. So now, thank you. I do have a couple of questions, and that is firstly, so this will be for you, I think, Chris. Is the integration with Tricentis out of the box, or do you need to buy some services from us to be able to do that?
Okay, that is a good question. Look, the integration is somewhat out of the box. We've prepared some aspects that can be done, and some of our customers do attempt to go through the documentation and perform any type of Rev-Trac integration themselves. The new REST APIs do make Rev-Trac quite easy and generic to integrate, but you're going to want somebody who's familiar with managing tokens, managing webhooks, and so on. Where we can provide the most value is actually when it comes to the process and engineering a great workflow process that's going to be user-friendly. So we'd encourage you to engage with our services team, but that being said, it's not mandatory. It does tend to just give a much quicker and more rapid approach to being able to go live.
Thanks, Chris. We do have another question. We might have to get back to you on this one, Serge. I'm not quite sure of the question, but the question is, does this integrate with ServiceNow as deployment gates? So I'm not sure what that means. Chris, you might have a better idea of what that means. If not, if you could just explain that a little more via email, Serge, we'll be more than happy to come back to you with a full and comprehensive answer.
Okay. Well, look, the concept of a deployment gate, I would assume is similar to a quality gate, in that in ServiceNow, basically you want to be able to control where Rev-Tracs or your changes can progress to and no further. So for example, you can move it to QA, but you can't progress it to pre-production until somebody inside of ServiceNow has approved that it's ready for migration to the pre-production environment. And then again, there might be some activity that can occur at the change layer, and then once again can be approved, but only once somebody inside of ServiceNow has said it's ready for migration to production. So that's certainly possible. And even in the scheme of what we've seen today with your live compare and test automation, both the functional and regression testing, we can certainly have deployment gates sitting inside of ServiceNow. Again, coming from a pure change management and workflow process perspective, the caution that you want to take is to make sure that people are working in the right systems, getting the visibility that they need in the right systems. So if the organization wants to be able to see everything from ServiceNow, but allow for the technical people, development and engineering team to be operating inside of Rev-Trac and relying on those test automation and impact assessment tool sets, that's a great way to do it. And it gives them the control from the ServiceNow perspective to say, we want to be able to allow things to be built, marked as ready for pre-production and ready for production, but we want the control inside of ServiceNow as to when they can then progress into their pre-production and production environments. So the answer, provided I've understood what the deployment gate is, I would say absolutely. It is certainly possible, and it's possible in the scheme of what we've seen today.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Chris. Serge has fed back saying that we're on the right track with that. So thank you very much. Look, thank you to all for attending today. We do trust that you found this valuable and a good use of your time. A question that we always get is, will the slides be made available and we'll be able to access the recording? It's yes to both of those, and you'll get access to those in a follow-up email that we'll be heading your way in the next day or two. So until we get to talk again, enjoy your day, and we'll speak again soon. So bye for now.
Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.